Hi, my name is Londa Rohlfing. I'm a pattern designer and I also love to travel the country to quilt guilds, sewing machine stores, teaching my brand of creative sewing. Today I'm here to talk to you about ruffles. Ruffles were really popular throughout history, but especially in the 60s. Even men had ruffles on their shirts. Well, in order to do a ruffle, you need to know how to gather. Can you see here on my bonnets, even on a pillow, the puffing, the ruffle? You just need to know how to gather. And it's actually one of the most important skills that you can perfect as a seamstress. You will always be gathering one fabric to another. So let's call what you see here in the polka dot as the base, and the white is obviously the ruffle. You need to do a little bit of math to figure out how full you want the ruffle. And really stop and think about how full can I make the fabric that I'm ruffling. So what I'm trying to say is that the thickness of the fabric that is the ruffle will really determine how much fullness you can get in. But do you see here the difference between 15 inches to the 10, that's 1.5 times full, compared to double full, 20 inches to 10 inches, or even look how very full 30 inches is, that's triple fullness to the 10 inches. I like to generally use 2 to 2.5. So in the samples that I'm using today as I sew, I'm using one that's 2.5 times full, or 25 inches being gathered to the 10. So let me show you one of my favorite techniques. I like to do a couple of things that are totally different. Number one, I do not increase the stitch length. Number two, I do not mess with the needle tension. And number three, I go backwards when I start, and I make use of needle position. So what I've done on this ruffle to begin with, I've got the wrong side up and I have already stitched one row of stitching, my regular stitch length. Now what I'm going to do is make use of a feature on sewing machines that I think people overlook. I'm going to keep my fabric fed in at the same location, but I'm going to move my needle. So what I'm doing here, let's say I have a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I have set one row at 5/8 and the other one now I'm setting at approximately 3/8. So I have one row of gathering stitches further towards the end of the ruffle and another row a little bit closer to the seam allowance. And as I already stated, I sew backwards to begin with. So then here I go. You can go real fast, and you know my eye is right here along the guide of the fabric on the throat plate. I think you're a much straighter sewer if you keep your eye on a guide on the throat plate rather than on the needle. Now when you're done, don't use the thread cutter, but lift the needle, pull it out, and leave yourself some nice long threads. Once you've done that, now do you see this mark here? That's my half mark, and I have a similar location marked on the base fabric. Now what I can do is just grab the needle threads and pull those up. I won't take time to do the whole thing because I have some others ready, but do you understand the beauty of going backwards to begin with? That way as you're pulling up, you're not going to pull your stitches out. So that's how I set my gathering stitches, making use of needle position. I have set one pin at the beginning. I have matched up those half points. So here I have a pin, and then I have a pin at the very other end. Now what I'm going to do, let me undo this, is simply pull up those threads so that the threads are as long as what I'm going to gather it to. So do you see at this point I have the threads equal? It doesn't matter if the gathers are equally distributed at this point. Now I'm going to take and figure 8 those threads around that final pin. So now the threads are that length, and then I can just take my fingernail and adjust the gathers. Now what I'm going to do is stitch right between my 2 rows of gathering stitches with, again, the regular stitch length. So I'll need to put my needle back into center needle position. I had a college professor who told me that setting gathers was really one of the most challenging things to do. She described these little gathers as being little soldiers standing straight up in line. The point is that you want gathers, you don't want tucks. You don't want folds of fabric, you want them to stand right up straight. Another feature that you could make use of on your sewing machine is to actually go into your settings and decrease the pressure on the presser foot. That will prevent the gathers from smushing out ahead of you as you work. And then I want you to see how nice the gathers look. Of course, we do have that extra row of gathering stitches, which I simply need to use a seam ripper and pull that row out, and then this one will just lift off. So do you see how nice the gathers are? So that's Londa's technique. Wrong side up, regular stitch length, and use needle position. A very common technique is to sew over a heavier thread. So when you sew over a heavier thread, the idea is that you lay down a heavy thread and zigzag over it, because if you pull up that heavy thread, then it's not going to break. But the thing of it is you've got to then be sure to anchor that thread to begin with. I have found another technique, which is to take the needle thread, pull it out in front of you, set your machine for zigzag, and then sew. I know this seems a little weird, but do you see how it's sewing right over itself? I won't take time to sew it all, but do you see then as I pull it up how it's already anchored at the beginning? So that's just another technique. However, if I were going to compare that technique and the first technique, I would have to say, as you look at one that I've done here, that these gathers are simply not quite as nice as the other gathers. Do you see that these are just finer, and on this one it's more tucks? So it just depends where the ruffle's going to be. This would be fine for a bed ruffle, but if it were going to be on a little girl's skirt, I might want to go with this technique so the ruffles were as perfect as they could be. Back to my original technique, there's one thing that I forgot to mention, and that is, let's say that you're gathering a skirt and it's a long way around, it's a really full skirt. You wouldn't want to depend on those threads, even polyester, to be able to not break pulling it up for a long distance. So this is a technique that I've come up with. Break it into sections. So can you see that I have overrun the middle with my first group of stitches, so they're stopping right here. And then I come back past the middle, and of course not stitching over the stitches that are already there. I'll do my reverse stitching and then start my second row. That way I have found I'm certainly going to have gathers the whole distance and not a lack of gathers where I have stopped one section and started another. I'm back and I've changed my foot to a foot called the gathering foot. Can you see that there's a slot in it? This foot is designed to both gather and attach simultaneously. However, personally, I find that I still like to do the gathering first and then attach, but I'll show you how it works all together. Some clues about using this foot are that you want to, if possible, put your needle in the far left needle position, which is where I have the needle now, and then you actually put your fabric totally underneath the foot. Not in the slot, but totally underneath the foot. Now I'll keep my stitches at slightly longer than normal, and you can see how much it pulls it up. But if I increase the needle tension, right now it's set at 4, let me take it up to, let's say, almost 6. Do you see how much tighter it's pulling it up? There's more pull on the needle thread. That's why it's pulling it up. And if I take my tension all the way up, so you'll just have to test on your machine. I believe this will go up to 9. Now watch how much it pulls it up. Isn't that amazing? I don't know how it works, but it's just great that it works. So let me show you how you can actually gather and attach all at the same time. see if I can get this in here. So the fabric to be ruffled goes totally underneath the foot, and that to which it's being gathered goes into the slot. Isn't that amazing? Great, the gathering foot. And then you can also gather with a serger. Do you see on this skirt? These were very long pieces of fabric, so I had a long length to gather. The best thing to use is your serger, and it's so simple. All you need to do is to be sure to make a really long chain to begin with before you ever get onto your fabric. And then you want to do some adjusting on your serger. What you'll do is increase your needle tension. So to increase, you want to go high. You want those threads tight, high, tight. That's the way I remember it. And as in most general gathering, you want to increase your stitch length, and you want to increase the differential feed. So you would put it to the highest number. What that means is that the front feed dogs are going to mush it in faster than the back feed dogs pull it out. I have it set up for 4 thread. So do you see how that's gathering? Isn't that amazing? And then on top of that, I can still adjust my gathers. I will want to do a long chain at the end, and then I will have the needle threads along which I can adjust the gathers themselves. So there are lots of ways of gathering, but it really is a technique that you need to perfect for yourself and on the machines that you're working on. There's one other foot that I want to tell you about. That is this one. You will find this in the accessory boxes of the very oldest sewing machines around. It's quite a contraption, but it does work amazingly. You can gather and attach with it as well. It's called a ruffler. You can gather every stitch, every 6 stitches, every 12 stitches. It looks more like pleats, but it's great. So perfect your gathering technique and enjoy ruffles.